October 15th, 2001. I'll never forget that night. It was cold, but inside the house was even more eerie. I'm Robert. My grandfather had passed away a few days earlier. When we gathered as a family after the funeral, my mother handed me an old box. On it was a faded label, for Robert and Oliver. To be opened at 3 a.m. There was no other explanation. No letter, no note. Just the timing.
Imagine a box left for you after your grandfather's death. This situation leaves Robert and Oliver with mixed emotions. They don't know what to do. So why is it midnight? 3 a.m.? Sit back and subscribe to the channel, because nothing good is going to happen to them.
Oliver and I were more than just childhood friends. My cousin, but also my confidant. That night, we were staying at my grandfather's house. The house was outside the city, on the edge of the forest, in a place where no one had lived for years. The electricity went out frequently, and the walls smelled of damp. But that night, the house was different. It was as if it was waiting for 3 o'clock with us. As the clock ticked past midnight, we began to look through the box. Our curiosity overwhelmed our fear. Oliver said, "Maybe it's just a joke." But we both knew my grandfather wasn't one to play pranks. He was a quiet, mysterious, and disciplined man throughout his life. He especially avoided discussing his family history. At 2:59 a.m., we sat down at the box. Waiting for that moment was as difficult as breathing. At precisely 3 a.m., we opened the box. Inside was an old cassette tape. Written on it in cursive was a sentence, "Turn off the lights before listening." Oliver looked at me and said, "This is getting weird." But I had already gotten up and turned off the lamp. We put the tape into my grandfather's old tape recorder. At that moment, all the sounds in the house stopped. No wind, no crackling, no ticking of a clock. Just silence. And then, the tape started. At first, there was only a crackling sound. Then came a muffled male voice. The voice sounded like my grandfather's, but older, more tired. "If you're listening to this tape, you're a part of it," he said. "This house, this family, has decayed over time. Every night at 3:17 a.m., the kitchen door opens by itself. At 4:06 a.m., the clock in the living room starts counting down. And at 5:00 a.m., someone is watching you." Oliver tried to laugh, but his voice trembled. "It's just a story, isn't it?" he said. But I couldn't answer. Because something had begun to stir inside me. It was as if the voice on the tape touched not just our ears but also our souls. At 3:17 a.m., a noise came from the kitchen. The door creaked open. Oliver and I looked at each other. The fear in our eyes was too deep for words. We ran into the living room. The clock's hand had started to turn back. 4:06 a.m. Right on time. And at 5:00 a.m., Oliver said there was someone in the room. But we were the only ones home. We didn't dare check who it was. After that night, nothing was the same. We couldn't sleep. We couldn't eat. We couldn't look in the mirror. Oliver sometimes talked to himself.
Robert and Oliver received years of therapy after these events. Their efforts to return their mental health to normal were incredible, but it wasn't the events themselves that brought them to this state, but the notebook they found afterwards. The whole thing was so terrifying, you had to close your eyes and put yourself in their shoes. It was as if someone was remotely interfering with the order in their home.
The first night we listened to the tape, the events that transpired shocked us. But the real nightmare began the next day. Oliver couldn't sleep until morning. His eyes were bloodshot. I, however, kept hearing the tape's voice over and over in my head. It was as if it had become etched into my brain. In the morning, we decided to listen to it again. This time, carefully, taking notes. The tape began with my grandfather's voice, but something about the tone was different. It was as if someone else were imitating him. There were strange pauses between sentences. The first part contained warnings about the house's clocks. But on our second listen, the rest of the tape revealed much darker things. This house was built in 1893. Its first owner was our great-great-grandfather, Elias. Elias had a room built in the basement. The room was invisible from the outside. No one who entered ever returned. The family thought Elias had lost his mind. But he had simply made a deal with something. Oliver and I exchanged glances. We had never heard the name Elias before. His name wasn't on the family tree. The tape continued. Every generation, someone is chosen. That person is responsible for protecting the house's secrets. But there's a price. The chosen person changes over time. They lose their memories. They lie awake at night. They can't look in mirrors. These words perfectly described Oliver's recent state. He couldn't sleep, avoided mirrors, and talked to himself. I was no different. As we listened to the tape, we sensed something moving in the house. Doors would open on their own, whispers would come from the walls. Later in the tape, it was revealed that Elias would descend to the basement room every night. He kept a notebook there. In it, he recorded hour by hour the supernatural events that had occurred in the house. The voice on the tape would say, "If you find the notebook, don't read it." But we had already made up our minds. That day, we went down to the basement. The stairs were old, creaking with every step. There were strange symbols on the walls. It seemed part of a ritual. At the very bottom, we found a rusty cabinet. Inside was a notebook that clearly belonged to Elias. The pages were yellowed, some burned. But the parts that were readable were chilling. 3:17, the door opened. 4:06, the clock counted down. 5 o'clock, she arrived. Today she chose Robert. As we read the notebook, we realized the house was playing tricks on us. Everything was planned. Every sound, every movement, every fear, the voice on the tape controlled it. My grandfather knew about this curse. Perhaps that's why he left us the box. Perhaps he wanted to warn us. But it was too late. From that day on, the concept of time in the house was distorted. Clocks were going backwards, calendars were changing. When we looked in mirrors, we saw other faces, not our own reflections. Oliver began to claim he was talking to Elias. At night, I would see the writing in his notebook on the walls. In the tape's final minutes, the voice said, "If you leave the house, it will follow you. But if you stay, it will become you." This sentence forced us to make a choice. To stay or to leave? But which was safer? Which was less painful? After that night listening to the tape, things began to change in our lives. But this change wasn't sudden, it was subtle. At first, we didn't notice it. It was as if the house was slowly drawing us in. A little more each day. A little darker each night. Oliver started talking at night. He would mumble in his sleep, sometimes laughing. One night, strange noises came from his room. When I opened the door, Elias's notebook was open on the floor. Oliver was looking at the pages and whispering something. His eyes were open, but he seemed to be looking somewhere else. For the first time, I was afraid. My cousin, he wasn't acting like Oliver anymore. I was different, too. The sound of the tape was etched into my brain. Throughout the day, I'd hear the phrase, "You're a part of him now," out of nowhere. sometimes the clocks in the house would start to go backwards. Sometimes, when I looked in the mirror, I'd see a shadow on my face. But worst of all, the whole concept of time had disappeared inside the house. We couldn't tell if it was morning or evening. Our family noticed a change in our behavior. When my mother said, "Robert isn't the same anymore," my father just nodded. Oliver's mother wanted to take him to the doctor. But Oliver refused, saying, "Doctors don't understand me." From that day on, he became even more withdrawn. He stopped eating. He would stay up all night, reading his notebook until dawn. One day, as we were all sitting together in the living room, the clock struck 4:06. The old wall clock in the living room began counting down. Everyone froze. Oliver stood up and said, "He's coming." We didn't dare ask who it was. But that night, the atmosphere in the house changed. It was as if someone else was there. Someone unseen, but felt. The next morning, a sentence was written on the wall of Oliver's room: "You are chosen." Whether it was written in pencil or in blood, we couldn't tell. Oliver couldn't remember the writing. But I knew. The voice on the tape had said, "Every generation, one person is chosen." Oliver was now that person. I was changing, too. Gaps appeared in my memory. Sometimes, I couldn't remember what I was doing for hours. One day, I found a note in Elias's notebook, in my own handwriting. I opened the door. Now he's inside. I didn't remember writing that note. But the writing was mine. The family realized we couldn't stay in this house anymore. Psychologists said Oliver might have the beginnings of schizophrenia. But we knew. This wasn't an illness. This was a curse. We decided to leave this house. We couldn't stay here anymore. We finally made it out. But something remained inside us. That house had changed us. Robert and Oliver were no longer the same people. When the decision was made to leave the house, we all took a deep breath. But that breath carried more of a farewell than relief. Because that house wasn't just a building. It was a living thing. And we had lived in it for so long. Our families decided to burn down the house where my grandfather had lived. After storing the notebook and the tape in the basement, they completely doused the house with flammable material and then set it on fire. Part of us was deeply saddened because all the memories of our grandfather, even our childhood, were burning so clearly. As the house burned, we continued to hear strange sounds. Finally, everything burned to ashes. When the smoke finally cleared from the ashes, we were astonished by what we saw. Although everything in the house had burned, the kitchen door, the living room clock, our grandfather's tape recorder, and Elias's notebook remained intact. The clock even continued to count down. The strange thing was, there were long bones in the ashes, which we assumed were human. It was as if there were bones in the house from the past. Bones that never disappear. We received psychological support for years. Therapy, medication, sessions. But nothing could erase that night. Oliver says he still talks to Elias sometimes. I still wake up at 3:17 a.m. some nights. And I hear the kitchen door open. I want to accept that I'm no longer in that house.
Years had passed. Robert and Oliver continued their lives in the city, hoping to receive treatment and live happily ever after. The notebook hadn't burned, the tape was intact, and the clock was counting down. The door was as good as new. The curse had moved into the city with them. Robert and Oliver weren't going to read that notebook, but it happened. So, what happened next in the city? The second video will be out soon. Like the video now and never read notebooks you don't know about.